lot of people stepping up right now, offering messages of peace and unity and not violence. So kind of a change here. It was a little volatile earlier on. Right now, though, although you can see the barricades in front of the 3rd precinct, left over from last night, put up today. We have a lot of windows that were smashed out last night. But again, right now, the crowd is growing, but it is peaceful at the moment. I can tell you a short while ago, maybe about an hour ago, just down the street, there was some sort of an incident or an assault. It appeared, and we were told that there was a stabbing and a couple of people were assaulted. They called police for help. When police arrived at that time, the crowd started moving that way. They threw eggs, they threw water bottles. Police in that case responded with flashbangs and a round of tear gas. They did manage to get those victims off into the back of squad cars and left, apparently, or presumably, to go to the hospital. That then dispersed. So there hasn't really been any kind of a situation between police and the crowd since then. Behind me now, you can see the AutoZone. I'm sure you saw pictures last night of it up in flames. This is what's left. Obviously burned to the ground along with a couple apartment buildings. There was a Wendy's that burned to the ground last night just behind there. I was told 16 structures in all did burn last night. Firefighters responded to 16 structure fires. Over here real quick, we had some looting in the area, a lot of looting actually, and you can see that the windows are boarded up all around this area here in the precinct. Again, what we have right now is a peaceful moment, a big crowd, but a peaceful moment as speakers step up to the mic and say, hey, let's not have a repeat of
I got this face, my envy on my face soap on my face. That's why I'm trying to show my face, because I'm watching clean.
If you've been watching any of the coverage from Minneapolis today about what happened last night, you know perfectly well that what's happening on the streets there, no matter what it may look like, is actually a quest for justice. It's a long overdue search for answers by legitimately frustrated protesters who, if we're going to be honest about it, have been oppressed for so long they can no longer stand idle. What you're seeing in Minneapolis is democracy in its purest form. Effectively, it's a political rally. Here's a representative seen last night.
This is the craziest stuff I've ever seen right now. This is Target right now.
Now, wait a second, you may be thinking. That didn't look like a political rally. Those people look like looters. They were smashing cash registers with hammers to steal other people's money. Well, yes, technically they were doing that. And yes, as a factual matter, they were smashing the cash registers because they had already stolen everything else in the store. So no, it doesn't look like conventional political activism. But before you judge them, keep in mind it could have been far worse. It's not like they were doing something immoral, like protesting Gretchen Whitmer's coronavirus lockdowns in Michigan. That would have been a different story.
Black people's right to protest is secondary to white people's right to be an armed protest with long guns, terrifying-looking war weapons.
This is how the protest of Floyd's death ended up. Police in riot gear flooding the streets with tear gas and shooting rubber bullets into the crowd. Another example of how this pandemic has been a kind of black light exposing all the inequalities in American life.
That's the meme that's going around right now with the cops, with the black kid on the ground saying hello to the white guy in camo with the AK-47 and the mask who was protesting in Michigan. That when it's white people with guns and they're out and they're angry and their faces with cops, didn't see any of that. Everybody's civil.
It's as if some people are accorded the rights of citizenship and other folks are just expected to be obedient. These folks ended up in the state capitol crate with automatic weapons, and they were treated with kid gloves.
Oh, you see, it's not at all like those fascists in Michigan. In Minneapolis, there's a reason people doing it. A legitimate reason. Even the cash register smashers, they were civilly smashing the cash registers, so relax. And by the way, the cash registers deserved it anyway. As Joy Reid suggested on MSNBC, they were probably European cash registers and therefore complicit in oppression.
Europeans came to this country to get away from being subjects of the kings in Europe. But what they did was they created for themselves sort of a kingdom, every man a king, but the subjects are black people, these armed white men who can get armed up and walk into a state capitol, and that's okay, and the police are benign. They don't even act afraid. But let black people show up and protest the death of an innocent black man, and suddenly, you know what, we need tear gas, we gotta go full force. Charlottesville, the same thing. The police were there to protect the people who were marching as neo-Nazis, not to protect the black people.
So who watches Joy Reid, you may be wondering? Well, it turns out the people who run Minneapolis apparently watch Joy Reid. As their city crumbled around them, local leaders huddled in deliberation. They emerged with a plan. They declared that racism is, quote, a national emergency. CNN immediately trumpeted the development as if it were breaking news. Meanwhile, mobs in downtown Minneapolis kept looting, stores kept burning, normal people of all colors huddled indoors, terrified. No one bothered to explain how any of this was connected. How exactly does racism have anything to do with looting ATM machines or stealing PlayStations from Target? It's confusing. What we do know is that riots are now acceptable because racism is a national emergency. That's the new standard. Okay, so now that we're in a state of national emergency, the question is, what is not acceptable? What's not okay? Anything? Here's what some of the, quote, protesters were chanting last night in Minneapolis. So you're not going to see that clip on CNN. How come? It's simple. Facts like this, and there are a lot of them, challenge the carefully constructed storyline that our leaders richly profit from. Therefore, those facts must be suppressed. For example, practically every day we're told that white cops are a mortal threat to black men, and some are, obviously. It's what started this whole thing. A black man was killed by the police. It's awful. But what are the national numbers on this? Well, actually, we know the answer. A study from last year found that white police officers were less likely to shoot and kill non-white suspects than non-white police officers were. In any given year, police kill more white suspects, armed and unarmed, than black suspects. And that's a fact, by the way. It's not political propaganda. It's provably true. Yet no one on television will ever say that because that fact threatens the scams they're working. Eddie Glaude Jr. might be the living embodiment of this phenomenon. If you've ever wondered whether yelling racist at the people you want things from is an effective business plan, Eddie Glaude is living proof that indeed it is. By regularly screaming racist, Glaude has been able to ride a mediocre academic career all the way to an endowed professorship at Princeton. It's a job with such high pay and so few actual requirements that Glaude can dress like a British lord and spend much of his day shuttling by limo between cable news hits. Talk about a sweet gig. As long as Eddie Glaude continues to denounce people as racist, the right people, he can probably keep that job forever. So naturally, Eddie Glaude has no interest in explaining how exactly racism makes people loot Target. It just does, okay? And if you disagree with that premise, you're a racist yourself, so shut up. As Glaude told viewers on MSNBC, it's all about the, quote, context.
It's human beings' natural inclination when they feel wrong, when they feel put upon, when they're living under oppressed conditions, is to lash out. And this is the history of the modern West, it's the history of the world in some ways. And so part of what we have to do is try to understand the context that led to what happened.
Oh, the context. And squint your eyes, you say, the context. Of course. There's a context to setting fire to McDonald's, says Professor Glaude. It's interesting. So you've got to wonder, how would Eddie Glaude Jr. respond if something like this happened to him? If looters descended on his house, would Glaude gently describe them as protesters if they made off with his Hermes necktie collection? If thugs with bandanas on their faces smashed the windshield of his BMW with rocks, would Eddie Glaude call the police, or would calling the police be racist? Just how long, in other words, could Eddie Glaude maintain his fraudulent racial